Hola, seguidoras, seguidores del grupo Grite. Otra vez otro encuentro, otra vez con Emiliano, Pablo y nuevamente un invitado de lujo. Hoy nada más ni nada menos que Eduardo Sánchez. Un hombre que le sonará de una pequeña película que en una época, hace un par de décadas atrás, causó conmoción y realmente cambió la historia del cine de terror en el mundo. Esa pequeña película era The Blair Witch Project. Um, Su legado sigue impactando aún hoy. Pensemos, por ejemplo, found footage es un ciclo, un subgénero. De hecho, está más vivo que nunca en estos momentos y es un placer para nosotros y es un honor para nosotros de recibir a Eduardo Sánchez. Welcome, Eduardo Sánchez.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Um, Fair open. The open word was about your mainly about the Blair Witch Project and the transformation of the whole perception of the cinema and the way that the found footage with the special characteristics that you put on your found footage. And after the years, it's still remain in the whole industry, and everybody who is trying to make uh, a movie of found footage, whether want, whether not don't want, they are paying an homage to your movie.
Thank you. Thank you.
And in the personal, I would like to say something. I saw the movie in the time of VHEs,
Hmm.
yes, and the blockbuster, where you know who you have to.
Yeah.
Well, my wife doesn't like any kind of horror, any. So I was late in the night in our apartment. We was uh, just married, and I'm this kind of weirdo that knows movies, books, stories, actors, all these kind of memorabilia. Uh, so I have my grandmother have a saying, among gypsies, we won't read our fortune. So uh, let me tell you that the final 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, I was stand up a meter, a yard of the TV set for the grade of restlessness and you know
Yeah.
so this is of course the exorcist when I was quite young, but this is one of the many few movies that really touch me in order to move my own fears. So uh, for a collector of fears, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And then did your wife watch it too, or no?
No,
Okay. No.
no,
Yeah. I figured.
no.
Yeah. Yeah.
She
No, it's
hates.
it's it's a freaky movie. Even for me, when I was editing them, by myself at night. I remember editing. I was editing that house footage, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And Dan would edit during the day. I would edit at night, and I started editing. Edit that, and then I like went back and watched the scene to see how. And all of a sudden, I was just like, there's something in this house. There's something in it. We had this little office, and within 5 minutes, I had the computer shut down, and I was like running to my car.
Oh,
The footage, that especially that house, because I was in that house, and it just it got to me. So I was like, man, that's is a very special kind of film that is affecting the filmmaker this way.
good.
Respecto a eso, Pablo, entonces creo que podríamos, antes de adentrarnos demasiado en la película, es teniendo en cuenta que se ha hablado y se ha discutido muchísimo, muchísimo ya de Blair Witch Project y nosotros no vamos a resumirlo acá, hay mucho escrito sobre el film, querría preguntarle entonces a Eduardo cuál cree que es el impacto, el legado que ha dejado The Blair Witch Project, en su opinión, en el siglo XXI.
Fernando said that the Blair Witch Project had been discussed and reinterpreted extensively.
Yes.
So we won't do it because it's already done.
Yeah, I agree.
Over the years. From your present perspective, whether you believe in is the firm's most enduring legacy in the 21st cinema, in the 21st
Century, yeah.
century cinema. Yes.
I mean, I think it's very similar to what, as far as I'm concerned, what Robert Rodriguez did with El Mariachi and Kevin Smith did with Clerks, is that the idea that like you can come out of nowhere with very little money and make a splash, and get your film out there, your idea, because it can be anything. There's a movie out now called Iron Lung that I don't know too much about it, but the guy financed it himself, and now it's in the theaters, and it's an amazing story to be just starting out, and then you just have a film come out like that. So I think Blair Witch, that's for me, like the people. When I go work in the industry, people come up to me and say a lot of, like, oh, you inspired me to do this, and you showed me that I could do this. For us, it was just like these guys, me and Dan and the other guys that made the film with me. We were nobodies. We had nothing. We had very few industry contacts. We had no money, and we had a great idea, and we believed in it, and we got it out there, and it did what it did. We didn't expect it to do what it did, and we had already had, we had failures before. I had done 2 features before that went nowhere, so we knew we had learned from our mistakes. But for me, it's when people come up to me and say, "Man, your movie inspired me to get into filmmaking," or everything. And then the style, I think, is also important, and not that we invented it, but the idea that like you can create horror in a very minimal, sometimes the best way to create horror is with very minimal effects and mood. The movie had no music, like it was a very basic approach to horror. So for me, it's like horror is about experimentation and about doing new things, and and I think that hopefully that is the spirit that Blair Witch continues to give young filmmakers out there.
Right.
Se me ocurren 2 preguntas, pero voy a hacer la que teníamos pensada. ¿Y cuál cree entonces, teniendo en cuenta, hablando de legados, pensemos en Blair Witch Project 2, la sequel, y que en su momento fue muy polémica, en el sentido de cómo se continuaba The Blair Witch Project, una película tan innovadora? ¿Cómo continúas eso? Bueno, la secuela, fue muy polémica en su momento, y también querría saber cuál es su posición con respecto a la secuela hoy, 2026.
All right. We are talking about the Book of Shadows, Blair Witch the second, which proved controversial upon its release, particularly because it abandoned the found footage aesthetic and you are credited as the creator of the characters. Looking back from 2026, how do you assess that sequel and its place within the broader Blair Witch mythology?
I mean, it's Blair Witch 2. It's a strange thing because Artisan, which is the company that bought the movie, they wanted us to do a sequel right away, and we were just we had spent 3 or 4 years struggling to make Blair Witch, and we were didn't want to make another horror movie right away. We thought, especially a Blair Witch movie. So they ended up going with somebody else, and we really liked, Joe Berlinger. We really liked his films. We thought he was very talented. But we just thought, like what you said in the question is like, how do you follow up the Blair Witch Project? Like, how do you, how does the sequel to Blair Witch start? Like it's a very challenging prospect. And our idea is we wanted to go back and do a normal movie about Ellie Kedward, the witch. We wanted to do like a movie in the 1700s in the United States and in the township, and how she got banished to the woods and the hysteria, kind of like a Salem witch trial kind of thing, the Crucible sort of story, but in the woods of Maryland in the winter. They dragged their feet, and by the time they said, okay, we want you to do that, it was too late. We were like, there's no way we can do that, and they wanted us to do it like in 9 months, and so it's hard to figure out. So Joe, I think, did his best. I think they did their best, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not a bad movie. I think it's a cool horror movie, but it lives outside of our movie, It's like I've always said it. It's like starting Jaws 2 by interviewing people in line in the movie theater and saying, "Hey, what'd you think of Jaws 1?" "Oh, it was great. I loved it." It's like it didn't make any sense to us that you're like now you're making the movie an actual movie and you're going outside. So for us, it was like staying in the mythology of it. So it's a hard thing because when I'm sure you guys understand when you write something, you put part of yourself in it, and you as a movie maker or as a writer, you sell that. You sell your creativity, you sell your heart, a little piece of your heart. And when somebody else controls it, it's very difficult to figure, say to how you feel, and you're mad and you're kind of glad because you're happy that it's going on and all that stuff. So it's very confusing, very conflicting. But in the end, I think it was, looking back on it, I feel it was a mistake. I think they should have waited. And I think if they would have waited for us, we would have done another movie, in a year, 2 years or whatever. And but it is what it is, and it's kind of one of those things that one of the big lessons you learn once you start making money in the film business or in any creative business is that they own your ideas. They pay you to sell your ideas to them, and then once they own them, and it's it's something you got to come to terms with.
All right.
Emiliano.
Sí, gracias, Fer. Eduardo, pensando en tu filmografía como un todo y yendo desde lo general a lo particular, podríamos decir, tus películas, no solo de Blair Witch Project, sino también Exist, Lovely Molly, Seventh Moon, Altered, se desarrollan en espacios abiertos, espacios rurales, inhóspitos, desconocidos en algún caso, o bien en algunas determinadas películas, espacios cerrados, sofocantes o angustiantes. Mi pregunta ¿es una idea personal preconcebida o no elegir parajes aislados? ¿Piensas que son más ideales para tu visión del género terror? ¿O es una locación que te permite trabajar de alguna manera en particular?
Amy is taking into account the whole bunch of your filmography, and ranging from the Blair Witch Project to X's Lovely Molly. I would like to add that my little dog, the name is Molly because of the movie. Indeed, indeed.
Nice, nice.
I was aware though, I told you. 7 Moons and an Altar are often an isolated rural setting, rural landscapes, or in confined, oppressive interiors. Is this a deliberate conceptual choice rooted in your personal vision of the genre, or do such locations offer your specific formal or narrative possibilities?
You know, I mean, look, the first thing is that in horror, being, it's the whole thing is being isolated, either physically or emotionally or socially. And so that's kind of where you have to take your characters, and then it's shooting, putting somebody in the woods, in the middle of the woods. It's an easy thing. People, it's a worldwide thing. Like the woods at night are creepy, and it's an easy setting. Also, shooting wise, you don't. It's fairly inexpensive to, when you isolate people, you can kind of build. It's the old Blumhouse model of like having all the horror in one house, and then you can not spend money on multiple locations. I mean, it's the basic kind of low budget movie, concept or approach, which is like, keep the locations to a minimum. To me, the woods and yeah, you're right. Like most of my movies take place in the, middle of the woods. Houses in the middle of the woods. To me, that's, I didn't grow up in the middle of the woods, but I grew up with a patch of woods behind my house. That to me that's where Bigfoot was, and that's where the aliens were, and that's where, ghosts were in the woods. And so I was able to, escape and also kind of deal with some of my, fears by going into those woods. But as soon as it started getting dark, I got to get out of here. So Blair Witch was born very much of that experience as a kid, and also just like camping, woken up in the middle of the night and you hear something outside, and it's always a bear. You always think it's a bear. Usually it's a squirrel, but it's sound in the middle of the night in the woods. It's just the scariest thing, and your imagination takes off. So for me, that was, that's kind of like, for me, the basis of horror is isolating people. If I had, unlimited resources, that's the reason I love Alien so much, is that it's, kind of haunted house monster movie in the middle of space and isolated in the ship. You have to isolate your characters, one way or the other. So for me, it's like the woods are just a natural. I can freak myself out very easily in woods, and even when when I'm trying to come up with new ideas or whatever, I usually go for a drive in the woods, or we have some land in West Virginia, and sometimes you go to the land and walk around at night, and it's creepy. It's creepy. So. I think, I have a movie coming up, hopefully this spring, that I'm shooting called Entity, that takes place in a house. It's not as isolated. It's kind of in a neighborhood, but the main character is isolated from everybody. Everybody that kind of comes to fight her. She feels alone in this world. So hopefully I'm getting a little bit away, next movie, away from the woods. But for me, it's it's kind of like, it's just part of my how I grew up as a child, and I never thought I was going to be a horror filmmaker. I didn't love horror movies. Like I loved certain horror movies when I was a kid, but I liked James Bond and action movies. I loved comedies, and if you look at my film school films, they were all action or comedy. Martin Scorsese ripoffs, things like that. But so I got it. Blair Witch was got me into the horror genre, and I love being in the horror genre. And I've learned a lot to be a great to be a good horror filmmaker, to respect the genre. Um, but yeah, the woods just kind of to me is just a perfect place to isolate people. And and it's a shorthand. You go in the woods at night, people understand. Okay, there's danger. So it cuts through a lot of the just the preconceptions though, or the other things that you have to set up if it's in another place, in another setting. But anyway, that's it. I mean, it's not like I consciously think of this. I'm just attracted to stories, in the woods. Kind of like just that's kind of my what I love.
Luego de The Blair Witch Project, his next film was Altered. So my question is, how was for you to pass from the minimalism of Blair Witch Project to a film so heavy in practical effects such as Altered?
All right. Um, Fernando asked that what was it like to move from the radical minimalism of the Blair Witch Project to a film such as Altered, which relies more heavily on special effects.
Mm-hmm.
In retrospect, were you satisfied with the final realization of the creature?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, again, like I said in my last episode, like my last question is, my what I loved were ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot. That's the alien thing was always really scary to me. The thought of so when this script came around and I read it and I was like, oh my god, I love this script, and we started rewriting it, making it. It was more of a comedy, much more of a comedy. The script the original script, and we started kind of turning it into a little more serious. But we knew we were going to spend more money. We knew, we went from a very low budget to I think we spent $5 million on Altered. So we had it was kind of like an education in not only practical effects and kind of managing that, but just managing a whole crew. Having different departments and producers and proper offices and then a sound stage. Just dealing with. It's the first time I had ever shot in a sound stage. We built the set and it was very exciting. So it was challenging, because again, you're right. You go from like something like Blair Witch that's so simple and minimalist, and then you go to Altered, which is a lot of effects and spending a lot of money. And we were shooting on film. We shot on 35 millimeters, so it's a very different approach to a different experience. But as far as the creatures were concerned and all that stuff, we early on we connected with this company called Spectral Motion, which Mike Elizalde is the the leader there, the founder, and they are they just did amazing work. They also worked with us on Seventh Moon, and they designed the Bigfoot and Exist. So they've been we've worked with them a bunch of times. And so we knew the alien was going to look cool, but it was a matter of like, how do you make somebody in a costume, look cool or, scary or whatever you wanted it to be. So, it was a challenge, but for me, the biggest challenge was just, dealing with like, again, like the basic kind of Hollywood, dealing with, actors and the agents and the managers and bringing them to set. We shot it in Florida, so just kind of dealing socially with what was going on. Having issues with, some of the actors, just kind of having to troubleshoot, just kind of managing that. And also the distribution, process, like actually dealing with a studio. that at first loved the movie and then didn't like the movie, and so it's just it was it was a big disappointment to us that it wasn't released in the theaters in the United States, and so it was it was a big education for us for sure. But it's like I'm proud of the movie. I feel it's as my first like big budget movie. I thought it was good, and I think we had some very talented people. I love all the actors. I think did a great job. I think the creature is cool, and it's a cool little contained movie, more of an indie movie, and I think. And it has, a good following. People love the movie. Some people hate it, but a lot of people tell me they love it. And, so for me, as the first time that, I went to had like a real budget, I felt we did a good job. But it was a movie, it was hard. I got ulcers, stomach ulcers during making the movie. So a lot of it for me was just learning how to deal with the pressure, the stress. So it was mostly an educational experience for us, like from the beginning to the end, just how and completely different from Blair Witch. Blair Witch was little, so small, and now you're dealing with real money and real investors and people kind of wanting to put their input onto everything and dealing with personalities. So otherwise, I mean, it was a positive experience, but mostly it was just very educational for us.
Great.
Hablando de Seventh Moon, lo que yo querría preguntar es, ¿qué le atrajo de la mitología asiática para hacer Seventh Moon? ¿Y cómo fue la distribución de la película? Porque es un poco difícil de encontrar.
Talking about Seven Moons, the first question is what you were attracted to the rich Asian mythology, and additionally, the other question is why has the film remained so difficult to access, and how would you characterize its distribution story?
I mean, I'll start with the distribution was, a disaster. It was, and it was, we did Seventh Moon, and right as we were about to market, to go to sell it, that's when 2008, the market of the home video market imploded. We went. Our sales agent was like, we went from 150 in small territories. We went from $150,000 advances to $10,000 advances. And we were just right in the middle of it. And luckily there's a company called Ghost House, which was run by Sam Raimi, bought it, and and they did what they did. It was super disappointing again to not have I mean, we loved that it was on Ghost House, but they didn't understand the movie, and look, the movie is a kind of a nightmare. Like it's not like a fun movie. It's so claustrophobic, and I wanted to kind of create this nightmare scenario in the foreign world, in a very isolated, not only like in the woods, but also social, just in a country where you don't understand the language. To me it was just like this very interesting concept. But it was funny because we were working with Sam Raimi years later, and we were talking about, and he asked what happened to Seventh Moon, and we were like, well, you distributed it, man. You bought it, but I mean, he's Sam Raimi. He must, he deals with a lot of movies. So, but he laughed and stuff. And then as far as like what got me into it, we were part of like a group of films that were supposed to shoot in China. There's a Chinese filmmaker named Ann Liu who got us in to a thing where there was a studio in China that had some money and they had a huge back lot and all this stuff, so that we were like, they wanted us to go and make movies there. So I researched, and I can't, I found this whole thing of the seventh moon, the Hungry Ghost Festival that happens in the seventh moon of the year, and um, I just love the idea of like these ghosts. It's kind of like Halloween. It's one night a year, and you have to put tributes and you have to put things out on your door and lock your doors and let them do their thing. I just love that idea of like, get inside for the one time, for once a year. So I figured, what if you got these stupid American tourists, coming to China right at the wrong time. Um, so eventually that whole thing fell apart in China, and ended up shooting it in Hong Kong. And it was again, a crazy experience. We were shooting at night in Hong Kong, and I loved Hong Kong, but the language was difficult. There's a lot of difficulty in that movie as well. And but the movie, and as far as distribution, I'm not sure what is, it's. I should probably look into where the movie is right now. It's it happens to a lot of things where they kind of just go off and nobody's interested, and it just kind of falls off the face of the earth. But again, to me it was like I just wanted to shoot this kind of nightmare abroad, and I felt like, as one of my, going back and looking back at that movie, I think I probably went a little too far, into like just the nightmare aspect of it. But again, it was, we learned a lot, and we had a good time, in Hong Kong, and learned a lot, and and the actual movie really did turn into a horror movie in the distribution process. So it was a tough lesson to learn, unfortunately.
Emiliano.
Sí. Pablo, antes de pasar a la siguiente pregunta, voy a introducir una pregunta muy chiquita que está relacionada con la película que voy a mencionar.
Sí.
En 2014, entonces, voy a pegar un pequeño salto en su filmografía. En 2014, Eduardo os estrena Exists, una película guionada, escrita y dirigida por él, en la que un grupo de amigos se van de camping y se topan con Bigfoot, el mítico Bigfoot. Antes de pasar a la pregunta que tenía pensada, Pablo, me gustaría preguntarle, ya que tengo entendido que Eduardo pasó parte de su infancia en Maryland, que me corrija por favor si no es cierto, y también entiendo que Maryland es un espacio en el cual Bigfoot es un objeto también de creencia. Quisiera saber si hay algo de su experiencia personal durante esos años de su infancia, etcétera, en Maryland, que llegó o aparece o que de alguna manera haya influido en la historia que Eduardo está contando en Exist.
Mhm. Okay. In 2014, it released Exist
Hmm.
about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And Amy wants to know that being so strong, a so strong heritage in the whole communities of the mountains and around, if in this particular movie there is something that remits to your personal experience, or is just to take a part of the um, tales and saying of the people about the presence of Sasquatch.
Yeah, I mean, when again, like I said earlier, like there's some woods behind my house, and
Yes.
I grew up in the '70s There was a lot of Bigfoot stuff in the 70s. There's a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek that is still
Excelente.
excellent. It still freaks me out. So for me as a kid, I had a love-hate relationship with Bigfoot, and I loved, I was so interested in it, but it scared the crap out of me. I remember, watching a documentary on Bigfoot, and every once in a while I had to change the channel just to something else, and then I would go back and watch, So even now, like it just really creeps me out. So I've loved Bigfoot. I've loved hated Bigfoot, but for me, it wasn't any personal experience, but it was knowing that there was woods behind my house, and I was 100% sure that there was a Bigfoot in those woods, and there was a window one of the windows in the shower of my house, my apartment complex. You can see into the woods, and I was for a while there. When I washed my face, I would try to keep my eyes open all the time because I was sure that I would open my eyes and Bigfoot would be staring at me through the window. That was the big thing for me, is that scene in Boggy Creek when he puts his hand through the window. Like, that's just nightmare. It's just a nightmare for me. And so it really did shape my childhood. It really I remember being traumatized by a lot of those documentaries. And that's what inspired Blair Witch, the idea of like, oh, if it's happening for real, it's much scarier. Even as an adult, you're like, oh my God, is this real? Whatever. So Exist for me came from just my love of Bigfoot, and also the big thing was that even in Legend of Boggy Creek, you don't see the creature very much, and in most Bigfoot movies, you either don't see the creature or it looks terrible. It looks like a guy in a suit. So for me, I was always. You remember that movie Greystoke, Legend of Tarzan, and
Yes.
yeah,
Of
Rick
course.
Baker. Rick Baker did the monkeys, the apes, and but the way they shot it was dark and mist. I love the way those apes looked, and I was always like, if you could do that to Bigfoot, you had some money and you could make like a really good Bigfoot suit and shoot it properly, you could make a really convincing Bigfoot, which had never been done in my opinion, up until then. So for me, Exist, is basically more of like a proof of concept that you can make Bigfoot look cool and look real and look scary. And the human quality that it has, and it's a and really like the greatest character arc in Exists is the Bigfoot. The Bigfoot has this crazy arc. So I was so that's where that movie came. But no, I've never seen a Bigfoot. I've never seen ghosts. I've never seen a UFO. I've had like some. I grew up Catholic, so I've had like some demonic kind of weird feelings, especially at night. You sense something in your room or whatever. But no, I've never seen Bigfoot. And I don't want to go, and I don't want to see Bigfoot either, man. Like those shows where the people are in the woods and they hear noise. I'm like, nah. And they've invited me. People have like, hey, come out and be in an episode. And I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna do that.
You are okay in the goods, I okay at home. Yes.
Yes. Or yeah. Or during the day, I'm fine in the woods. In the night, not so. I want to get out.
Okay, Emily.
Sigo yo, Pablo.
Ah,
Teniendo en cuenta que muchas de las... Eduardo es conocido por sus found footage film, pero en muchas de sus películas no utiliza el found footage. Sin embargo, sí utiliza la cámara de shaky cámara, la cámara en movimiento, y querría saber qué es lo que le gusta tanto de este estilo, qué es lo que le atrae. ¿Es una cuestión de realismo?
even when you are not working within the found footage framework, you frequently favor a shaky camera aesthetic. What draws you to this visual approach? And do you associate with a heightened sense of realism or immediacy?
That's a good question. I mean, to me, I mean, first of all, just speed wise, shooting handheld is a much faster approach than setting a movie, a dolly and all that stuff. Even in my television work, like I did a show called Queen of the South, which was a lot of it was handheld because we were just you just had to move so quickly. And it's if you have handheld, you can move the camera forward, you can follow a character, you can swish pan. It's just a lot more open to kind of just the covering the scene in a very unique way and covering and following the action of the actors or what's going on in the frame. Again, there's not that handheld work is the only way to bring realism or to bring a tone, obviously, to the shoot. But to me, it gives the handheld approach gives it a little bit of a, even if it's a normal movie, it gives it a little bit of a documentary feel, a little bit of even like TV shows, cop shows or whatever. It just gives it a feel of like that the audience is there in the room. It gives it a little bit more of that. And I think for horror movies, especially, you really are trying to bring the audience into as close to the characters as possible, and I think that's why Blair Witch is scary for a lot of people, is that there's no escape. You're there with Heather and them and Mike and Josh, and I think some movies, the you can't do that with every movie, of course, but there is this kind of like this personal feel of like that there's a human quality to the camera work. And it's more difficult to do with a normal, a non-handheld approach. So, like I loved, I always love mixing it. I think like for me, Seventh Moon was way too much shakiness, but that was kind of an experiment for me. Like for me, like my horror movies. It's always about taking risks, and pushing things and trying to do something that hasn't been done. At least for me, that's kind of where I'm at. I love the kind of going into unknown territory. So, sometimes you go there and you miss, or it doesn't come out the way exactly the way you wanted it to come out. But there is something cool in like discovering what this movie is, in the process, especially in the editing room. So for me, handheld is just my choice. It just gives me more flexibility, and it's easier. It's fast. It is faster. It's faster to shoot. It's just faster to set up. On Seventh Moon, I was actually one of the cameramen. Like I did camera work for most of the movie. Obviously, it's harder to do, in a normal movie. But I love that kind of, do it yourself kind of attitude. And the reason I went so crazy on Seventh Moon was that Altered was very controlled, very much dolly, very little handheld. And I felt that the movie came out a little stiff. So I wanted to go the other way. And with Seventh Moon, and I think I went way too far. But I still love handheld. I feel like it's, it just gives something, a personality to the footage that you don't get with normal films, normal on a studio based camera work.
Pablo
Okay.
Soyo, Lovely Molly is a great film,
Thank you.
a truly great film. Y es un gran salto en la carrera de Eduardo Sánchez porque es muy diferente a los films anteriores. Si no la vieron, véanla. Es una película que básicamente trata sobre la imposibilidad de las personas con adicciones de estar completamente recuperadas y traumas producidos por violencia infantil. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo llegó a ese script, cómo llegó a guionar y a pensar esa película y cómo concibió el final, la última escena de esa película?
Okay, Fer is talking about Lovely Molly. That according, it's a great movie. We all do concur that is the great movie, and as well as a significant evolution in your filmography, engaging with themes such as addiction, relapse, and childhood trauma. How did the core idea of the film emerge, and how did you arrive at its unsettling conclusion in the last
Y sí,
SN?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, Molly was it's like it's the of all my filmography, it's the one that I put myself most of myself into. Like I wrote it, I directed it, I edited it. It almost killed me. I was really depressed editing that. It's a dark movie. The original idea for Lovely Molly was from Jamie Nash, who was the co-writer, and he helped me. He wrote with me Seventh Moon. He wrote Altered, Exist. He's kind of my partner. He was like, hey, what do you think about like a found footage, exorcism movie, like a possession movie? And as a, one of my, my favorite and least favorite, because it's so fucking scary and traumatic, is The Exorcist, the movie. When I was a kid, I grew up Catholic, and my mom, when the Exorcist aired on television in the United States, it was a big deal in the house. And I remember sitting on my mom's lap watching The Exorcist, because for my mom, it was like, this is a lesson of why you don't fuck around with Satan, El Diablo. So I always respected the shit out of, The Exorcist, and I always wanted to make my own, possession movie or my take on it. So Jamie came up with the idea. It's like, hey, imagine like a found footage, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. So he wrote a first draft, and I just found, usually Jamie does most of the writing in our collaborations, and I go in and fix things, and just kind of add some things and tweak it. And this was what I started kind of messing with it, and I realized that this was it's a different film than I wanted to make, And I told Jamie, I said, hey, let me go back and do a first draft. So I did a first draft, and for me, it was, the concept was like, what if you had you were poor, and you had no health insurance, which is a big deal here in the United States, and your wife or your partner was going through a really horrible psychological, psychiatric kind of episode, psychotic episode, and you had can't go to the doctor, you don't have health insurance, and I went through that in my 20s. I had no health insurance, and things happened to me, and I went into debt, and it's just something that here in the United States, I know in most other countries you don't understand that pressure, but for us it's like, getting sick can cost you your entire life, your house, everything that you built, unfortunately, it's the way it is here. And so it started, I kind of like put that into the story of like, okay, how do you, in Exorcist, Ellen Bernstein is she's a Hollywood actress, she has money, she can afford anybody. How do you do it when you don't have, money for doctors. So I just, I started coming up with this story, and the idea of childhood trauma. And for me, I had a great childhood, honestly. Like there was no trauma. Like, I mean, my mom was, very Cuban, con like chancleta, and that kind of stuff. But overall, my mom and my dad gave us everything, and they sacrificed everything for us, coming to this country, and I didn't have any kind of that trauma, but I did have the trauma of Bigfoot and just the fear. My mom put a lot of fear in me about being kidnapped. Like, she was sure that I was going to be kidnapped, so everything was like, ten cuidado ahí, be careful, and you have to watch out for strangers. And so I was all the time thinking that I was going to be kidnapped, whatever. And so I had a lot of that kind of weird childhood trauma that my mom, and eventually I learned that my mom had some childhood trauma of kind of similar to what happened to Molly. So for me, it was kind of, and that, my mom never dealt with it, unfortunately. It was a different time, and so for me, it was a little bit of just trying to figure out that also what happened to my mom. And it was just so I just kind of went into it with that and just kind of wrote this, and it's the first script I've written by myself, mostly because Jamie came in and did a little bit of tweaking, but since I was in film school, so it was like very much a personal kind of journey. And then, the ending, are you guys talking about the ending where in the very ending, or the ending when she walks into the woods? Because for me, it was like the real end, the actual ending when she opens the book and the sister feels, to me, it's just that the father's, trauma continues because he did the same thing to the other sister as well. So this idea of like the continuing trauma, Molly escapes it by just leaving the world, and it continues in her sister. And then the ending where she walks into the demon, the original idea when we shot it was she just walks into the woods and she just disappears into the darkness. And Gretchen, for me, like, casting Gretchen Lodge, just, she's so brave in that movie. Like, she was just amazing. And I thought she was just an amazing, just one of the best performances ever in a horror movie, I feel, or in any movie, really. She was just so brave about it. And then we edited the movie, and we did a little bit of testing, and people were like, again, audiences want a little bit of an answer, like, is it real? Is it in her head? Unfortunately, that's kind of like the way that, it's very difficult to keep the ending of a horror movie mysterious, because people, what the hell? And that's the same problem that people had with Blair Witch. It was like, what the hell happened there? And it's like, well, that's kind of part of the thing, like, you don't get all the answers, So we were like, let's see if we can add some kind of demon that she's been seeing. So we added, they did it by some magical digital effect. They added the actor with this, the creature. And I was really happy with it, because I felt that, like, not that it proves that there was something supernatural, but at least you get an idea of what Molly was seeing, and what Molly is walking into. And I've always, like, played with, like, Gretchen and I have talked about doing writing a sequel together. And I think it still would be a cool idea. But again, that movie, really, like, I almost retired from filmmaking after that movie, because it was just so painful, and like the editing especially, and also, and again, from the trauma of Altered and Seventh Moon, failing commercially, I felt that I'm like, this might be the last thing I do, and fortunately, I actually started going to a therapist, and got on some medications that really helped me out and really saved my career. But that movie is, I mean, I'm really proud of it. I think it's my best film, and I really would love to do a sequel to it. I'm still trying to figure out what it would be. But just the darkness of that movie is, to me, it's just disturbing. Even looking at back now, I'm like, man, that's really dark. But again, like, I always want to, especially in my horror movies, I always want to push and try something new. So, I'm proud of it, but again, it almost killed me. So I'm sure you guys can relate to that. Just fucking, it's just killing you to write something, and it's just the most painful thing, but you got to do it.
Indeed. Certainly, indeed.
Emiliano.
Sí. Eduardo ingresa a la saga, a la franquicia de VHS en la segunda antología con un segmento titulado A Ride in the Park, que propone un punto de vista diferente de los zombies, quizás más realista, o un punto de vista diferente, dejémoslo así, y un enorme laburo de cámara subjetiva, de lo cual ya había hablado hace un momento. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo llega a esa franquicia o cómo le llega el guión? ¿Y cuál fue su desafío trabajar en una película episódica como VHS?
All right. Where are my notes? Amy asks about you joined VHS franchise with the segment A Ride in the Park, which offer an unusual perspective of the zombie figure and makes extensive use of subjective camera work. How did you become involved in the project, and when did you consider the principal creative challenge of the segment?
We were, I did that with my partner Greg Hale. It's the first thing I co-directed with him, and we were fans of the first one. We love. I mean, again, it's like, VHS is a found footage franchise, and we were the guys that kind of, popularized found footage. You can't talk about found footage without Blair Witch. So the first movie was, whether, for me, it was kind of it's a kind of love letter to Blair Witch, even though, it definitely inspired, I think, you could say without Blair Witch, maybe there wouldn't be VHS. So for me, we were like, it's amazing. It's cool. We love the movie, and the segments are cool. And we were like, just, it's cool that, this new, first of all, young filmmakers taking a little bit of what we did and kind of expanding it, making something different. And that's the biggest thing for us, is like how, the cool new ideas, for me, it's always pushing, and it's great to see something that maybe I started a little bit of it, and then they take that and they make something else. So they asked us to be part of the second one, and for us, we were like the older, we were the oldest ones, the older as filmmakers, and also, we felt like if we're gonna put something in VHS 2, it better be good. We don't want to be like, oh my God, they let them in because they're Blair Witch and they fucked it up, and the other segments are great, but theirs is weak. So for us, it was like, look, we'll do it, but let us find the idea. Let us find the proper idea for this, because without the proper idea, we don't want to do it. So again, Jamie Nash sent me this idea, of, this guy who turns into a zombie, and you have his POV. And I was like, oh my God, it's so much fun. And again, like you were saying, Emiliano, it's a new approach. It's like a very unique approach to zombies, and also I'd never done a zombie movie, and it's kind of, you got to make a zombie movie, Everybody wants to make a zombie movie. So I just thought the concept was so fun. So he wrote the script, and I gave him notes, and we went back and forth. And then it was really cool to like. It was the first movie I had shot since Blair Witch that was very much like a very do-it-yourself film school kind of movie. It was very low budget. It was us setting up the cameras ourselves. I mean, it was very much of do-it-yourself kind of thing. We shot it here in Maryland, which is where I live, and I rarely get to shoot here in Maryland, so it was cool to be able to go home every night. And we shot it over 2 weekends, and it was really great. Me and my partner Greg and I, co-directed, and it was fun to like kind of figure that out. And again, and then the second part of the question, as far as like working in the, with other filmmakers in the anthology, it was a great experience. It was, I mean, I've done other anthology movies, and some of them are smoother than others, and this one was my first one. And Brad Miska and the whole producing, Roxanne Benjamin, like all the producing team, they just kind of said, hey, here's the money, go do what you want to do, whatever. And I got to meet really great filmmakers, the other filmmakers. It was cool to like be with other young filmmakers, kind of taking again what we did on Blair Witch and kind of blowing the doors open. I just love that, the idea. And our segment came out really good, and I think it's a really solid movie. Just I don't think there's a weak segment in it. I feel like we went to Sundance with it, and it was cool to hang out with Adam and Simon and Jason, and it's just. It was just a really, really fun, and it was, we were the old men, we were the old men in the group. Greg and I were just, just hanging out with these young guys, but it was really cool. And also we met, we got to know Adam and Simon, and so then later on when they got hired to do Blair Witch in 2016, we knew them and we had a good relationship with them, so it was much easier to give them control of our the franchise, because we knew them and we knew they respected the movie, and they're just awesome guys and super talented filmmakers. So it was overall it was a great experience, and it really did it's not typical of anthologies. It's just anthologies are tough. But when it comes down to it, I love working with other filmmakers and kind of making a movie together. The last one we did was Satanic Hispanics, and that was just really fun to work with those people and meet new filmmakers. It's always fun to contribute, to collaborate. That's what I love about filmmaking is the collaborative process. And even I do a lot of TV shows now, and just there's so many talented people out there, and just I love the opportunity to learn from them and to work with them. And it's I feel blessed that I'm part of the business, but I love doing VHS too.
Emiliano.
Sí. En los últimos años, Eduardo tuvo podría decirse un viraje pronunciado hacia la dirección de episodios de series de televisión. Que van desde Supernatural o Charmed o American Horror Stories, From Dusk Till Dawn, etc. Especialmente Queen of the South, gran serie, véanla. Pero bueno, mi pregunta al respecto es si hubo o hay algún elemento que lo motive especialmente en cuanto a trabajar en ese formato audiovisual.
And he said that in recent years, you have increasingly direct TV shows. And the question is, was there a particular motivation, artistic or practical, that prompted this shift toward the television format?
I mean, it was a lot financially, after 2008, as I'm sure you guys all know, making movies as an indie filmmaker became a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
And it was just the financing was hard. The money. You used to be able to like make movies and distribute them just on video and be able to like make a pretty good amount of money. Back in the Blockbuster days and all that stuff. And that the business changed, and we were kind of scrambling to find something else. And Robert Rodriguez called me, and he was like, "Hey, I'm doing a show, a new network called El Rey, and we want to bring in Hispanic and Latino filmmakers and actors, and So I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And then he hired me to do the third episode of Dusk Till Dawn, first season. And it was the first television episode I'd ever done, and it was very, I was very nervous. But the style and kind of the rhythm of indie filmmaking works very well. It's very compatible with TV because you're always moving fast. You never have enough time. It's just like go, go,
Yeah.
go, go.
Yeah.
And so I was very good at it. I was able to really work with the crew, and I just loved doing it. And for me, financially was a reason, but also like what I talked to you guys about earlier with Lovely Molly is that making movies to me was becoming very painful. I would put because it would I'd work on these movies for 2-3 years. And not only financially was it not paying off, but also just emotionally, I was just being drained, and it was just really difficult. So the TV thing for me was a great relief because it was more collaborative, and I wasn't in charge of the script, I wasn't in charge of the casting. I was just there to go in, direct, make the best thing I could do, and it's almost like doing a short film,
Yes.
and it's it's 1 month of work, and you're done, and again you get so much rewards, like working with somebody like Robert Rodriguez and working with the writers and the actors, and just the opportunity to work with a bigger budget, having real like toys, like camera and cranes and steady cams and all this great stuff that usually in indie film you can't really afford. And I just I just did really well, and I got hired a lot, and I've been able to build a career in television. But really the big thing, and I really love, I'm going back to features this year. Fingers crossed. I'm going to do my first
Yeah.
feature in a long time. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
But I still love doing, television. I just did an episode of Will Trent, which is a show on ABC, and with Ramon Rodriguez, and it's just, I just love the collaborative spirit. I love the crews works, they just work so hard. I just, to me, like people who work in television are kind of like my heroes. You're working 60-hour weeks, and you just, if you're lucky, 60 hours. It's usually more than 60 hours, and just the energy. I love. They bring such great energy to me, and I try to give the energy back, and it's just a really, most of the time, a very fulfilling experience. And also it's always a new crew. Now I've gotten to the point I meet a few new people. I meet some people that are there that I know from earlier shows, but mostly it's new people. And also they're such there's a lot of young people, and just it's just such great energy to have that energy like that I had in my 20s and 30s, where like, yeah, let's do it, let's go, we can do. It just makes, to me, it reminds me why I became a filmmaker, and that's why I'll always continue to do TV. I feel like there's such, like I've been lucky enough to do, I did 11 episodes of Queen of the South, and it was very much a family that I still have relationships from that show. Same thing with Supernatural. I did 5 episodes of that, and they brought me into the family immediately. It was so each of these shows, even and Will Trent, hopefully they ask me back, for next season. But I love coming in and being part of the family, and getting to know people, and just it's just an awesome experience, and it's a very lucky experience. The camaraderie that happens on TV shows and movies as well, but TV shows, because it's if you get a year after year, like the people on Supernatural work together for 15 years. I mean, that's a huge part of people's careers, and to me it's like it just I felt really lucky to have been a part of that, and you can it's always creatively very fulfilling. They're always I always try to do my best work. I try to put my heart and soul into it, and it's just good exercise. It's a good way to keep. I'm such a better director now than I was before television. You learn how to problem solve and how to shoot things quickly and how to set things up, how to work with actors, DPs. Like, it's just such an education. So I've really enjoyed my my tenure in television, and I hope to continue it. I mean, my thing right now with my partner Greg is to have our own TV show, hopefully, and then be able to like bring in filmmakers and actors that we respect and we want to work with and into the fold. But so we've gotten close a couple of times, but we really would love, that's really the end goal for us in television.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Has participado, perdón, has participado de Satanic Hispanics, otro film episódico que explora la problemática de la latinidad en otros lugares y sus dificultades. ¿Qué significó para ti participar en este tipo de película? ¿Y qué sientes que has podido aportarle a esta temática?
You recently participated in Satanic Hispanics, an anthology film that engaged with questions of Latin identity and displacement. How did you become involved in this project? And how do you feel you were able to contribute to its thematic exploration?
I'm good friends with Alejandro Brugues and Mike Mendez, and they told me, hey, we're doing this anthology and it's called Satanic Hispanics, and I was like, all right, I'm ready to go. Just the title alone. It was I met Gigi, I met Demian through it, and just great people, great filmmakers, and again, it was just cool to be part of such a talented group of filmmakers. And the Latino part to me is, like I've spent most of my life in the United States. I lived in Cuba for 2 years before, leaving. But also, obviously I feel like, I'm always going to be Cuban, and I feel, always trying to get closer to the Latino in me. The Cuban in me, and it's very difficult because I've lost a lot of the language. Like I can understand Spanish very well, but speaking is a different. I can get around, but it doesn't work for me. I get really nervous. So I'm always trying to kind of get closer to that and to study it and to just be. There's so many talented Latino filmmakers, especially in horror. It's just I just love being educated and learning new filmmakers. So they, I was lucky enough to get involved with them, and again, Jamie sent me an idea for for a vampire that gets stuck, with daylight savings and has to be home in 15 minutes and just gets crazy. And then I knew Hemki Madera from Queen of the South, and we stayed friends, and you know, he's just very talented guy, and we always want to work together, and we're always looking for things to do. So I sent him the script, and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect for Hemke. This is, you know, because I know, you know, he usually plays like a tough guy, but he has incredible comedic chops. You know, he's really funny guy. And so he, you know, as soon as we got him, I was like, all right, this is going to happen. And, you know, and it was a great experience. Again, it was the first, I hadn't made like a low budget movie in a long time. Usually I was working in television, and you get a little lazy when you're in television, when you go from television to indie, because all of a sudden now you got to do all the indie work. You know, as a director in television, you have your responsibilities. In indie, it kind of blows up, like you have to do everything, you know, a little bit of everything. So that was hard, you know, but I made the movie here in Maryland, and I was able to hire my daughter and my son were part of the whole thing, and it was cool to work with people, you know, from Maryland that I hadn't worked with in a long time, or I had never worked with, and it was just a fun time, you know. And I edited the movie, and you know, it came out really funny, and the whole Satanic Hispanics thing, you know, again, there isn't a weak segment. I think you know, all the segments are strong, and they're all different, which is I really love. You know, some of them are super, you know, there's a couple that are super serious, and then there's Alejandro's, there's mine, Mike's is kind of in the middle. But it was, I mean, you know, unfortunately, you know, it's a sad thing that, you know, in the United States, Latino audiences make up a huge part of horror movie audience. Like, if you can somehow get them to like a movie, you know, to get into a movie, they really support it. And the theory behind Satanic Hispanics was like, oh, if we put a movie out there that, you know, is related directly to, you know, it has Hispanics in the title, maybe we can get the Latino horror community to champion it. But unfortunately, you know, we didn't have the money. You know, we were working with a company that does mostly straight to video kind of movies, and yeah, we just didn't have the resources. It wasn't really anybody's fault to like really get it out there and like really market it. And it didn't do as well as we wanted it to do, unfortunately. But we, you know, it made a lot of top 10 lists, and we did some festivals, and the horror audiences, at least people who have seen it, really do love the movie, and I think it's a good piece. You know, it's a really good piece of work, and I'm proud of, you know, adding that to my resume. But unfortunately, you know, and we run into this all the time, is that, you know, the Latino Hispanic market in the United States, they love horror movies, but it seems that when you try to turn it, you know, to lean in on the Hispanic part of the horror movie, they don't like it. Like, even there was a Paranormal Activity movie that was, and I didn't see it, but it was Latino characters, and it didn't do any business, you know. And I think so there's something, you know, I'm not sure if the Latino population doesn't like being, you know, catered to, like, oh, you know, you think you're fooling us to go see this movie or whatever. I don't know what it is, but, you know, being a Latino filmmaker, and also, you know, especially working with Alejandro, you know, a lot of our movies and TV shows that we do that we've come up with together have Latino characters, and, you know, we want to like promote, you know, life in America for a Latino, especially these days. You know, it's very important, you know. But unfortunately, the audience hasn't, you know, leaned in on any movie, and there's a lot of examples of, you know, the Hispanic characters in horror movies are just leaning in that haven't done well for some reason. And maybe it's just because, you know, the movies aren't you know, there's a lot of different reasons why movies, you know, don't work and do work. Um, but unfortunately, you know, it hasn't happened here yet with like a big, you know, Hispanic-driven horror movie that's like done really, really well. And we hope, you know, we wanted satanic Hispanics to do better than that, but it didn't, unfortunately.
All right.
Emiliano, nuestra
Ok,
last
Our last
question.
question.
All right.
es correcto. En 2025, tan cercano como el 2025, Eduardo ingresa al universo de R.L. Stine, al universo televisivo de R.L. Stine, dirigiendo un episodio para la nueva entrega de Goosebumps, Escalofríos en castellano. El episodio titulado The Girl Next Door está considerado como uno de los mejores episodios de esta nueva entrega. Y es un episodio, valga la redundancia, que se apoya en la nostalgia y toca otro tema recurrente en la obra de Eduardo, que es la abducción o la presencia alienígena. Mi pregunta, o mis dos breves preguntas son: ¿cómo fue trabajar sobre la adaptación de esta historia que lo acerca a un público quizás más liminal, más juvenil? ¿Y cómo fue trabajar con David Schwimmer?
All right. In 2025, you enter in the universe of R.L. Stine by directing an episode TV show of Goosebumps, The Girl Next Door, widely regarded as one of the strongest entries in the new series. The episode draws heavily on nostalgia and revisits themes of alien presence and adoption common in your work. How did you approach adapting this story, and what was your experience collaborating with David Schwimmer?
You know, I mean, I love the, you know, I mean, Goosebumps. I mean, I was a little too old for the, you know, to read the Goosebumps books, but I always had, you know, it was always this cool thing of like kids, you know, scaring kids is always, you know, you can't go too far, but you know, it's a very difficult kind of line to walk, and you know, Goosebumps is classic, you know, probably the most successful series of kids, you know, horror books. And also, I mean, you know, and back, you know, to old man Sanchez, like I loved Scooby Doo. Anything with, you know, creepy things as a kid, even though I wasn't a horror fan, I actually was a horror fan, you know, growing up. So Scooby Doo for me was like my Goosebumps. And even, you know, even Scooby Doo, which is silly, you know, sometimes there's some creepy shit in Scooby Doo, you know. So I love that, you know, facing the fears as a kid, because that's, you know, a lot of my trauma came from that as a kid, as I've explained earlier. So going in, you know, getting the job at Goosebumps, I loved the first season, and this is the second season, and I was really excited. And then, you know, to work with David Schwimmer, I had never met him before, and you know, he's this, you know, kind of legend. And you know, and I love the idea that like there was this found footage aspect to the episode, and they brought me in saying, hey, this is, you know, you're the found footage guy, come in and do it. So it was the first time I had done found footage in a long time. I don't know when, I can't even, I mean, I guess Exist, or even, you know, Ride in the Park was you know, last time I did it. So it was cool to kind of go back into that world, and also like educate, kind of teach people about found footage, the crew, you know, because, you know, when you haven't worked found footage, you don't realize that, you know, the crappy camera work is part of the experience, you know. So you have to train, you know, these camera people are artists, you know, with framing, and you know, in normal shows you just let them do their magic, and oh my god, that's a beautiful shot, whatever. In this one, it was like, no, man, it's not about the beautiful shot. It's about this. It's about, being, just kind of teaching. So it took a little while to kind of get the found footage aspects of it right. But just working in that world, and it was, we shot it in New York, which was, I live 4 hours from there, so it's great to be kind of close to home. The crew was great. It was it was a great episode. The kid, all the actors were amazing. David Schwimmer, I actually didn't have that many scenes with him, but in the very, I had like maybe 2 or 3 scenes with him, and the one scene I had, he was literally like, it was just his head that we were shooting. He's like he's decapitated. So, it was a little bit of challenging kind of, working in that, environment, but he was really cool, lovely guy. We've actually kept in touch. We email each other every once in a while. He's a huge horror fan, and he was, it's why he did the job, it's why he did Goosebumps. He's like, I've loved horror movies, and I felt that this was like kind of a good way to kind of dip my toe into horror. And him and I have been talking. I've sent him a couple of scripts. Him and I have been talking about doing a horror movie together. He has a really great idea that we're developing together. So it was just cool. It was really cool. And then going back and watching the episode, I think the abduction part of it and that trauma is, again, it's even though I didn't pick the episode, the episodes pick me. It was an amazing kind of, again, through line of my work of like childhood trauma and abduction, that I've visited a bunch of times in my previous work. And there, and for me, like, I think that there's, and the same thing with Altered is like, there is this, and Lovely Molly more directly, but there is this correlation with, alien abduction to like actual abuse of children, and with on Altered, we definitely had that where it's like, okay, the alien is the abductor, is the molester, is the child molester, and obviously that's a very, very heavy topic, and I love that horror kind of lets you deal with that, but in a not a simple way, but in a more commercially attractive way, and the same thing. And that episode, it was pretty hardcore. I mean, these kids had been abducted as little kids, and it affected the lives of everybody around them. And now we're, years later, and the people that are around them are still traumatized by their abduction. So it was cool to be able to like take that part of the story and bring it to life. The story of the kids back in the 80s that went down into this thing and were basically abducted. But again, it was it's just a lot of fun. It was kind of like, again, I've been so fortunate in my career, not only with Blair Witch, but with so many things that have happened to me, and I feel like really blessed that I continue to get like good work, and again meet new people and just kind of work with like the best people in the world in this field, and Goosebumps was just another example of that. It was again, television, there's always this madness of like, oh my, like in on my episode, the set where the alien, I don't, if you guys saw it, but where the alien comes out, that was not, it was half built, it was not built, so we were dealing with half a set, and there's people complaining about it, and people, there's just things, people are working as hard as possible, and nobody's like, it's just the way it is. Television is just crazy like that, and you're kind of like, running and gunning the entire time. So there was a lot of challenges, but I really love the way that the crew kind of came together and did a really special episode. And I'm glad people love the episode. It's definitely it's one of my favorite things that I've done in television. So I hope that maybe, if they can ask me, if they ask me back, they like my work, ask me back for another season or another show. But again, even talking to you, talking to you guys is part of the blessings of my career, and I appreciate talking to you guys and having you guys interested in what the fuck I have to say. I'm always amazed that such intelligent and unique artists want to talk to me about stuff that I've done. So unfortunately, I'm not aware of any of your guys' work, but I will look it up and respectfully. But it was it was great to meet you guys and great to chat, and have me back, please, whenever you want to, because I love having discussions about not only my work but just other people's work. And we again, we're very lucky to be in this even though it's frustrating, but we are lucky to be in this show business that allows us to get our things that are in our brain out there. We're very fortunate to have been allowed to do this.
Thank you very much indeed. You really was very generous, very open mind, much better open heart. You share your feelings, your recollection of memories, you share your passion for what you do and the way that you do, because there is a lot of people doing things, good things, but many are doing things the way you do, because you transform the absolutely approach to the cinematography, and since then you were adding a new step, going higher and claiming for more perspective and more creative script writers and filmmakers and so on. So really, for me, I told you, the Blair Witch is one, with The Exorcist is my two best movies, and it's supposed to be my daughter's, but finally it's mine. So her name is Molly, and you know why. And I say this is our last question, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm tricky. Our really last question always is, if you can share, of course, what you are up to.
Oh, what don't we do? Well, I'm about to start. First of all, thank you for that. It's I try to, it's like all of us. We try to do. We do what we do, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But you got to get up and continue to do it. And I've been really blessed that I've been able to have a long career, which I know is not always the case for most people in this business. So I'm very, and again, talking to people like you is part of, what I love about this, position I've been put in. But what I'm up to, there's a movie called Entity that my partner Greg Hale, who was the producer of Blair Witch, he wrote it. And we are about to start prep in Atlanta, hopefully in March. I'm also an executive producer on this movie called, well, we don't know what it's called right now. It's called The Influence Project, but we don't. It's a found footage movie from these filmmakers in Copenhagen, that Greg and I were fortunate enough to become executive producers, and we rewrote the movie a little bit, and we helped them out, and they've done really great work, and it's a really cool movie. It's a found footage movie. I think you guys will really like it. Um, and So that one's coming out sometime later in the spring, maybe March or April, May. Um, and then I have a TV show that I'm trying to get off the ground. That is going to also be found footage that we're trying to finance. It's going to be we we um, we went down the normal route of like trying to sell it to to a television production company or distributor, and it's just it's so experimental that it's just very hard to kind of let have people, as you guys know, the more to play in the game, you got to stay within the boundaries and play by the rules, and we don't want to do that. We think we want to do something experimental and do something new. So we've been having a little trouble getting it off the ground, but it looks like we're moving forward on it, and it's going to be really cool. And so and otherwise, just trying to brave the cold here. It's really cold here in Maryland, and just trying to stay warm, and again trying to stay motivated, and in our country is going through some trouble right now, and hopefully we can come out of it. But again, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you guys, and hopefully we can do it again very soon.
All right. Once again, thank you very much. We will see you pretty soon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you. See ya.
Bye.